My name is Tiana Mercer, and I am 30 years old. I started working when I was only 13. Throughout all those years, I never once asked my family for a single dollar. I paid my own tuition, handled everything on my own, and today I just signed the most important set of documents of my life. The first home I bought entirely with the money I earned myself. I thought it would be the happiest moment ever. I called my parents just to share the joy, so they would know that I had finally achieved what I had dreamed of since I was a child. But 2 days later, instead of congratulations, I received a court summons. My parents weren't just suing me. They were suing me for $500,000, accusing me of stealing my sister's future. What they didn't expect was that this lawsuit would expose a secret, a truth powerful enough to fracture the entire family they had worked so hard to preserve. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching this video from. And if you've ever felt like your success was turned into a crime, hit like and subscribe, because this story might just be your story too. Now then, let's move on to what happened next. What do you think my family did after filing the lawsuit? Let's find out. The pen in my hand suddenly felt strangely heavy. I stared at the final signature on the thick stack of documents. Autumn sunlight from Baltimore slipped through the large glass window, scattering golden streaks across the polished wooden table. "Congratulations, Tiana." My lawyer, a silver-haired middle-aged woman with gentle eyes, smiled as she slid the keyring toward me. "You're officially the owner of the condo in Inner Harbor." Keys. Keys to a home that belonged solely to me. A 2-bedroom condo facing the harbor, the one I had looked at online hundreds of times, the one I had toured 5 times before daring to make a decision. My hand trembled slightly as I touched them. I had waited for this moment for 17 years. 17 years of sweat, exhaustion, hope, and disappointment, all leading to this. I didn't just want this. I earned it myself. I had been working since I was 13. My first job was washing dishes at a small diner in the Upton neighborhood. The smell of grease and bleach clung to me every night. While my friends went to football games, I was scrubbing pots. While my younger sister, Caden, was taking expensive piano lessons, I was counting every dollar to save for my first used car. When I told my parents I wanted to go to culinary school, they laughed. My father, Harold Mercer, a respected history professor, said it was a hobby. My mother, Lorraine, said I was wasting my potential, insisting that obviously Caden was the one with the bright future. So I handled everything myself. Every cent, scholarships, savings from working 2 shifts at the bakery, until I paid off my student loans last year. And today, at age 30, I bought my first home without borrowing a single dollar. I stepped out of the office building into the golden glow of Baltimore's late afternoon sun. The cool autumn breeze brushed through my hair. I clenched the keyring in my hand, feeling its weight, the weight of freedom, of accomplishment, of a life I built with my own hands. I wanted to share it with someone. I wanted to tell them. Maybe, this time, things would be different. If you've ever accomplished something on your own and hoped for just a small acknowledgement from your family, stay here. The next part will show you how that feeling can be crushed in a matter of seconds. I leaned against the aging red brick wall of the building and took out my phone. My finger hovered over my mother's number, still saved in my favorites, a habit from childhood, back when I still believed that one day she would truly listen to me. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then my mother's voice came through, cold, distant, her usual work voice. "Tiana, what is it?" I took a deep breath. My chest tightened from excitement and nerves. I tried to sound cheerful, enthusiastic. "Mom, I have good news. I did it. I just signed the papers for my new home. I officially have my first condo." Silence. Not normal silence. A dense, heavy silence, like the air before a storm. 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds. I thought the call had dropped. Finally, my mother said, "Oh." Just that. Oh, not congratulations, not I'm proud of you. Just a flat oh, like someone hearing the price of vegetables at a market. The smile on my face, a smile so big it made my cheeks ache, slowly faded. A condo, huh? My mother continued, her tone as flat as if she were reading a grocery list. Well, that's good, Tiana. At least you have a proper roof over your head now. A proper roof. Not an achievement, not a milestone, just a place to stay. I tried again. Maybe she was busy. Maybe I rushed things. It's in Inner Harbor, Mom. 2 bedrooms with a balcony facing the water. That's nice, she cut me off with her familiar I'm busy tone. Listen, your timing is perfect. I was just about to call you. And then, unexpectedly, her voice changed completely. It brightened, warmed, filled with pride, filled with excitement. Everything I had never, ever heard directed at me. You must come home for dinner this Sunday. Don't be absent. I gripped the edge of the wall. Yes. What's going on, Mom? Oh, everything is wonderful, she practically squealed. Your sister, Caden, has big news to share. Amazing news. Her hard work is finally paying off. Big news. Those words twisted inside my mind. I had been working since I was 13. I paid off $60,000 in student loans. I bought a home in one of the most expensive markets in the country. But that wasn't big news. That was just a proper roof. What news, Mom? I asked, my voice turning raspy. Oh, I can't spoil it. Caden would kill me. She laughed, a proud, joyful laugh I had never heard when talking about me. The future she's always destined for. It's finally here. A real family legacy. Family legacy. That could only mean something related to Caden's new real estate project, the perfect child. And then Mom ended with her usual line. Don't be late, Tiana. 7 sharp. And bring something. Maybe those little lemon tarts you bake. Caden loves them. Then she hung up, without waiting for me to say goodbye. I stared at the dark phone screen, standing there on the busy Baltimore sidewalk. My hand tightened around the keys, the testimony of 17 years of labor, of hundreds of sleepless nights, of days when no one believed I could accomplish anything. But to them, it was all just a proper roof and a little dessert for after dinner. And the real excitement? As always, it was Caden. Let me tell you about the first moment I realized I was completely invisible. I was 8 years old, a Saturday morning in March in Baltimore. I remember it clearly because I had counted every day, every hour. My birthday. I was turning 8. I woke up before the sun had fully risen. Pale pink dawn light seeped through the window of my small room. My grandmother Ruthie's old house in Druid Heights, where our whole family lived, always smelled lightly of aged wood mixed with magnolia flowers from the yard. I lay in bed, smiling softly. Today was my day. I imagined the birthday cake, maybe a chocolate cake with vanilla frosting, or strawberry, the one I pointed at excitedly in a magazine last week. I pictured the candles, the warm glow, the happy birthday song, and a hug from my parents. I imagined them telling me they were proud of me. I ran downstairs, heart pounding. Dad was sitting at the dining table reading the newspaper. Mom was in the kitchen making coffee, the scent of roasted beans filling the space. Caden, 6 years old at the time, sat on the sofa watching TV, her braids tied with 2 pink bows. I stood at the entrance of the living room, waiting for someone to notice me, waiting for a smile, waiting for a birthday wish. No one looked. Dad, I said, my voice trembling with both excitement and nervousness. Do you know what today is? Dad looked up, frowning. Saturday, he answered automatically, then returned to his paper. My stomach tightened a little, but I didn't give up. No, I mean, Harold. Mom stepped out of the kitchen with her coffee, interrupting me without even looking at me. "You need to take Caden to her piano lesson at 10. Her teacher says she might be ready to perform in next month's recital. She's wonderful." Dad grinned widely. "Of course, that's my girl, a little prodigy." I stood there, frozen, like I was dissolving into the air. But today," I tried again, my voice smaller. Caden turned from the TV, annoyed. "Can you move? You're blocking the screen." I stepped back. All day I waited for someone to remember, waited for a cake, waited for a wish. Nothing. That evening when Mom called us for dinner, I still had hope. Maybe they were hiding a surprise. Maybe there would be a celebration after dinner. But no, Dad kept reading the paper. Mom washed dishes. Caden got extra TV time. And I went upstairs alone. I lay in bed in the dark, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. That night, I didn't cry. I only felt something cold, heavy, enter my chest. A feeling I didn't have a name for then. But now, I know. It was the feeling of not being seen, of not mattering, of existing, but being overlooked as if I wasn't there at all. 2 weeks later, Caden's birthday arrived. 30 kids, a costumed entertainer, balloons, a 3-tier princess cake, presents piled high. I served snacks to the other kids. No one asked why I didn't have a birthday like that. If you grew up in a family where all the spotlight shone on your sibling while you were left in the shadows, keep watching. The next part explains why I wasn't just forgotten, but taught that I didn't deserve to expect anything. When I was 13, I learned the biggest lesson of my life. April. Spring in Baltimore was blooming, cherry blossoms scattering pink petals along the sidewalks. My school organized a field trip to Washington, D.C., visiting the Smithsonian museums, the Lincoln Memorial, and historic landmarks. This wasn't just a fun trip. It was part of our curriculum, a chance to see what we had only read in books. The cost? $90. For my family, $90 was just half of one of Caden's piano lessons. But for me, a kid with no money of her own, it was an entire universe. I stood at the doorway of my dad's office. The room smelled of old books and leather, golden lamplight shining over tall shelves. I held the yellow permission slip, wrinkled from being clenched all day. I knocked gently. "Dad?" He looked up, still half-focused. "What? Can I talk to you for a moment?" Dad put his pen down, crossed his arms, leaned back, the posture of someone being inconvenienced. "Hurry up, I'm busy." I stepped in and handed him the paper. "My school has a trip to D.C. It's part of my history class. Everyone's going. I need $90. Dad glanced at the paper. Just a glance. Then looked back at me, his eyes cold. $90? Yes, it includes the bus, admission, and lunch. Mom sighed behind me. That familiar sigh, the one she reserved for me. "Tiana, don't be difficult," she said, tired. "We've talked about this. The money goes to Caden's piano lessons. She has real talent." I turned to Mom, desperate. "But this is for school. I'll be the only one." "And what do you have?" Mom cut in. "It's just a field trip." I looked to Dad, my final hope. Dad was a history professor. He had to understand the value of this trip, but he waved his hand like shooing away a fly. "Your mother's right. We have priorities. Caden's piano is an investment. Your trip? A luxury." Then he looked straight at me, for the first time since I entered. "If you want $90, earn it. It's time you learn to be independent." Independent? I was 13. I stood there, the wrinkled paper in my hand. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just nodded and walked out. The next morning, I walked 3 blocks to Mr. Gus's diner. The help wanted sign faded in the window. Inside, the smell of grease, coffee, and bacon mingled together. Mr. Gus looked me up and down. "You're a bit young to be looking for a job." I can wash dishes," I said, voice shaky but determined. "No paperwork needed. $2 an hour. I just need a chance." He stared at me for a long time, then nodded. "You start this Saturday." From then on, every weekend I worked. No hanging out, no football games, no movies. When my friends returned from D.C., talking about the Lincoln Memorial and the Smithsonian, I looked down. I had $74 hidden in a jar under my bed, and from that day on, I never asked them for money again. There was only one more time I asked for help. I was 18, freshly graduated from high school. I had received an acceptance letter from the Baltimore Culinary Institute, one of the best culinary schools in the country, with potential internships at Michelin restaurants. I had a diploma. I had the acceptance letter. I had $8,000 saved from Mr. Gus's diner and other jobs. But tuition was $60,000. After dinner, I stood in the living room, heart racing. This time it was different. This was my future. "Mom, Dad, I have good news." Mom looked over from the kitchen. "What news?" "I got accepted into the Baltimore Culinary Institute." I held out the letter. "It's one of the best schools." Dad lowered his newspaper, then laughed. A sharp, cold laugh. "Are you serious? Still not done with that baking nonsense?" Each word pierced through me. "This isn't baking, Dad. This is a career." "Tiana," Mom stepped forward, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Be realistic. Caden is applying to law school next year. That's a real career. We can't waste money on you going to cooking school." "I already have $8,000, I said, trembling. "I just need you to co-sign the loan. I'll repay everything." Dad stood up, towering, cold. "No, we will not co-sign a loan so you can study baking. Caden will become a lawyer. That is the investment." He paused. His voice sharpened like a blade. "If you want to waste your life, then do it on your own, with your own money." I looked at them, two people who brought me into this world, and felt like I was staring at strangers. I didn't cry. I simply nodded and walked away. I borrowed money, handled everything myself. For 3 years, I worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, no parties, no dating, no vacations, just work, study, and debt. But I made it. And now, at 30, I have paid off everything. I bought a home. I stand firmly on my own 2 feet. And still, they don't see me. I hate Sunday dinners. But even though I hate them, I still go. I drove through the familiar streets of Druid Heights. Rows of red brick houses lined up close together, old oak trees stretching their wide canopies over the sidewalks, afternoon sunlight filtering through the layers of leaves, painting the asphalt with a flickering pattern of light and shadow. This used to be the heart of Baltimore's black community, a place of a kind of renaissance, of art, of pride. My grandmother Ruthie used to tell me about the golden days, jazz musicians playing right on the sidewalks, every house with its door open to neighbors, the whole neighborhood feeling like one big family. Now many houses have deteriorated. Some stand abandoned. But my grandmother's house, the one my great-grandparents bought back in the 1950s, where she grew up, where my father grew up, where I grew up, still stands. 3 stories of red brick, with a wide front porch holding a few rocking chairs, stained glass window panes, and an old brass bell my grandmother always polished with great care until it shone. This is the family legacy, as my father likes to say. I parked the car and reached for the box of lemon tarts I had made that morning. They were perfectly beautiful, the meringue whipped up into soft peaks, the tops baked to the exact golden brown I wanted. I knew Caden would eat 2 pieces and not bother to say thank you. I walked up the stone steps. The heavy wooden door was already open. The familiar smell hit me in the face, roasted meat, sautéed onions, and my mother's expensive perfume. Inside, the air was thick with expectation. The table was set with the best china, those white Wedgwood plates with gold rims that only came out on truly special occasions. The silverware had been polished until it gleamed. Linen napkins were folded into swan shapes. This wasn't a normal Sunday dinner. This was a performance. My sister Caden and her husband Tyrese stood near the fireplace, clearly the center of attention. Caden, 28, glowed in a lemon-yellow dress, her long braids spilling over her shoulders. She inherited my father's charisma and my mother's beauty, a combination that made her the center of any room. Tyrese, her husband, a white real estate agent from wealthy Roland Park, stood beside her, one arm loosely around her waist. He had the kind of smile that never reached his eyes and wore an expensive watch he always accidentally positioned where everyone could see it. "Tiana, you're here," my father Harold said, handing me a glass of wine I did not want. "Tonight is a big night. Big news from Caden and Tyrese." My mother Lorraine squeezed my arm lightly, her smile tight. "Your sister has a real vision," she whispered. "We should be proud." We sat down at the table. The traditional seating arrangement placed me at the far end, as always, nearest the kitchen door, close to where the leftovers were cleared. After the prayer, Tyrese stood up and dimmed some of the lights. He had an entire presentation prepared: projector, screen, the works. "Thank you all for being here," Tyrese began, his voice smooth, clearly well-rehearsed. "As you know, Caden and I have always had a passion for this community, for its history." He clicked a button. The screen showed images of Druid Heights, old homes, tree-lined streets. Then the images shifted to modern architectural renderings, glass and steel condos, sleek and cold. "We're calling this project Druid Renaissance," he announced. "We're not just building homes, we're revitalizing a legacy. Our plan is to purchase a number of older, less desirable buildings and transform them into high-end mixed-use spaces." He was describing gentrification, wiping out a long-standing black community and replacing it with wealthy white residents. But he wrapped it in a bow and called it revitalization. Caden stepped forward, her voice full of passion. "We're bringing in new businesses, a yoga studio, an artisan coffee shop, a high-end boutique. We're going to make this neighborhood desirable again." Desirable for whom? I wondered. I glanced at my father. He was completely absorbed, nodding along, his eyes shining with pride. My mother looked at Caden as if her daughter had just discovered the cure for cancer. This was the real big news. Not the small home I had just bought, not the success I had scraped together over 17 years, but this sugar-coated plan, a plan that would drain the soul from the very community they vaguely claimed to love. "And now," Tyrese said, switching to the final slide, "we're ready to talk about the most important part, the initial funding phase." Caden placed her hand over Tyrese's and stepped closer. "Of course, a vision this big needs capital. We've already attracted interest from several private investors, but to keep full control of the project, to keep the legacy in the family, we need core partners." Tyrese nodded. "We're projecting a 20% return within the first 18 months. This isn't just a project. It's an opportunity." An opportunity. I looked at my sister, at the way she stared straight at our father. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment. My father Harold did not disappoint. He slowly pushed his chair back and stood. His tall frame immediately dominated the room. He raised his wine glass. "Legacy," he began, his deep voice booming, identical to the tone he used when lecturing his students. "What is family legacy? It is not just a few old photographs, not just a handful of stories. It is the future we build from the past. It is the responsibility of one generation to ensure the next generation flies higher." He paused, looking at Caden. His face softened with pride, a kind of pride he had never shown me. "Your mother and I have watched Caden grow into an exceptional, gifted woman. She and Tyrese have brought us a vision that honors our history while building a prosperous future. This is not just a project. This is the next chapter for this family." He paused again, letting the words soak into the air. My stomach clenched. I knew exactly what was coming. Caden and Tyrese need capital. They need the family's trust. And as the head of this family, I want to say that we trust them. He raised his glass higher. Your mother and I have talked this through very carefully to ensure that Caden and Tyrese have the resources they need to secure this family's future. We've made a decision." His gaze swept the table. Finally, his eyes landed on me. Just for a moment, but long enough for me to see the clear contempt. "We are going to mortgage this house, the family home, to provide the entire initial capital for their project." The glass in my hand slipped and fell onto the tablecloth, the soft thud swallowed up by Caden's delighted scream. Tyrese shouted with joy, pulling my sister into a kiss. My mother Lorraine burst into tears, wiping her eyes as she stared at her perfect, successful daughter. And I sat there, my whole body going cold. They were mortgaging my grandmother's house, the house whose property taxes I paid, the house I had spent my own money to repair. They were taking what should have been my share of the legacy, the history of our entire family, and putting it into the hands of my sister and her real estate broker husband, all for a project on paper, while I was sitting right there at the table. If you have ever sat in your own home watching people decide its future without treating you as part of the conversation, stay with this story, because what happened next was not just a family argument. It was the moment every mask fell, and the truth was finally called by its real name. The room exploded with laughter and congratulations. Caden clung to Tyrese, her face flushed with happiness. My mother jumped up to hug her, both of them crying tears of joy. My father raised his glass, smiling in satisfaction. "We are going to change this neighborhood. We are going to change this whole city." The soft clink of my silver fork hitting the china plate sounded barely audible. Yet, in that euphoric atmosphere, it felt like a gunshot. The whole room turned to look at me. Smiles froze. My mother's hand stopped mid-motion as she wiped her tears. I looked straight at my father. "You can't do that," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the room like a blade. Caden's face changed instantly, tightening into a furious frown. "Oh, here we go again," she snapped. "Don't ruin this for me, Tiana. Not tonight." My father Harold let out a short, dry laugh. It was a laugh dripping with contempt. "Why not?" he asked, his voice dropping low, like he was speaking to a rude child. He leaned back, assuming the posture of a man, fully in control. "This is our house, Tiana. Your mother and I will do what we believe is right with it." Tyrese cut in, his tone slick as oil. "That's right, Tiana. This is about the future of the entire family, something you can't possibly understand when you're busy with your little bakery." My grandmother's face flashed in my mind. I heard her voice again, that night in the hospital. "Let them have enough rope to hang themselves. One day they'll show who they really are. When that day comes, you'll know what to do." That day was now. I slowly placed my napkin on the table. I lifted my head to look at my father, his face full of smug certainty. I looked at my mother, who was shaking her head, not out of shame, but because she couldn't believe I dared to speak up. I looked at Caden, who looked like she was ready to leap across the table and tear me apart. "No," I said, my voice strangely calm. "This is not your house." The smile on his face stalled. "What did you just say?" I did not look away. "I said this is not your house. This house hasn't belonged to you for 5 years. This house belongs to me. Grandma Ruthie left it to me." The silence didn't just fall. It shattered. Caden was the first to explode. She leapt from her chair so fast it nearly tipped over. "You're lying!" she screamed, her voice high and shrill. "You're a liar, petty and jealous. You can't stand seeing me finally get something, can you? So you have to destroy it." My mother Lorraine went pale, clutching her chest. "Tiana, stop this right now," she ordered, her voice shaking with shock and rage. "How dare you? How dare you invent something so horrible just to get attention? Apologize to your father. Apologize to your sister. Immediately." Tyrese said nothing, but the polished smile on his face was gone. In its place was a cold, calculating stare. He looked at my father, then at me, as if assessing how the game had just changed. But the most terrifying person was my father, Harold. The blood rushed to his face, turning his skin a deep, furious red. He pointed at me from the far end of the table, his entire arm trembling. "You wicked girl," he spat, each word dripping venom. "You did this. You went to my mother when she was weak and sick, and you took advantage of her. You manipulated an old, frail woman." "I didn't trick anyone, Dad," I replied, my voice beginning to shake, but holding steady. The pressure of the entire room pressed against my chest. Grandma Ruthie knew exactly what she was doing. "Knew what?" he roared, slamming his hand on the table so hard the expensive china rattled. "That she was disinheriting her own son? That she was handing the family home, our legacy, over to a baker? To the daughter who has always been a disappointment?" He didn't wait for me to respond. He glanced at Caden, then back at me, his eyes narrowing into two sharp slits. "I know exactly what this is. This is your sick, pathetic revenge because we wouldn't pay for your ridiculous culinary school. Isn't that it? That's what this is about, isn't it?" "That's not the truth," I tried. "Enough!" he roared, launching himself from his chair, marching straight toward me. The distance between us shrank to just a few inches. I could smell the heavy wine on his breath. "I'm calling a lawyer first thing in the morning," he shouted, each word crashing into my face. "We are contesting that will. We will prove you exploited a dying old woman. I will sue you and take everything back. I will strip you of everything you have, you ungrateful child." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "You will not get this house. You will not get a single cent. You will get nothing." It took me exactly 3 days before I could bring myself to step into my new condo. The confrontation with my father had exhausted me so completely that I shook with fatigue. But as I slid the key into the lock and pushed open the door to the home that belonged solely to me, the panic in my chest began to ease. It was quiet here. Afternoon light slipped in through the balcony doors into the empty living room, illuminating tiny dust motes dancing in the air. The smell of fresh paint, clean wood, and the faint salty tang of Inner Harbor drifted together. I was holding a cardboard box labeled Kitchen. Inside were my favorite cookbooks, the ones I'd kept since culinary school. I smiled as I pulled out one worn volume, its cover stained with flour, all about French pastries. I brushed my fingers lightly over the cover, then set it on a pristine white shelf. This was my fresh start. No more walking on eggshells, no more biting my tongue until it bled just to swallow everything I wanted to say, no more sitting through polished success reports about Caden while everything I achieved was treated like trash. Here, I could just be myself. I had just opened the second box when there was a knock at the door. Loud, urgent. I jumped, causing the stack of plates in my hands to clatter back into the box. I walked to the door, my mind racing through possibilities. I hadn't given anyone my address yet. No one had said they were coming. I peered through the peephole. A man in a slightly rumpled suit stood outside, holding a thick manila envelope, his expression bored and impatient. I opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" "Are you Tiana Mercer?" he asked in a flat voice. "Yes. What is this about?" "You've been served." He didn't wait for me to understand. He simply shoved the thick envelope through the gap, letting it fall onto the new wooden floor with a heavy thud. Then he turned and walked away. Not another word. My heart started pounding in my chest. Served. I slowly bent down and picked up the envelope. My name was printed on the front, along with my parents' address. I tore it open, my hands shaking. My eyes skimmed over the dense legal language until they landed on the heading that made my vision swim. Plaintiffs, Harold and Lorraine Mercer. Defendant, Tiana Mercer. Subject, Last Will and Testament, and Codicil of Ruthie Holloway. Then I saw the accusation, undue influence. I sank down onto the nearest box, the stack of papers trembling in my hand. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment threat. This wasn't some angry outburst at the dinner table. He had actually done it. He and my mother, my biological parents, had officially, through the legal system, filed a lawsuit against me. They were dragging me into court, accusing me of manipulating my dying grandmother. They were trying to take the one thing she left me, the only thing that came from the only person who truly believed in me. The fragile peace I'd felt just minutes ago vanished, replaced by a cold, nauseating fear rising from the pit of my stomach. The war had officially begun. I sat on the floor of my empty condo. The smell of fresh paint mingled with the scent of paper and ink, creating a dry, harsh, suffocating odor. I read through the complaint. Once, twice, 3 times. Each time the words grew sharper, more brutal. This wasn't just a legal filing, it was a character assassination. They described me as Tiana Mercer, a baker struggling financially. They painted an entire picture of me, a woman nearing 30, desperate, impoverished, consumed by jealousy of her successful younger sister. The complaint claimed that after noticing my grandmother Ruthie's declining mental capacity, I had systematically isolated her from the rest of the family. It accused me of exploiting an elderly woman's confusion to coerce her into altering her will. The words blurred behind my tears. Coerce, exploit, declining mental capacity. That was not the grandmother I knew. Grandma Ruthie had been sharp as a razor until the very end. She managed her own stock portfolio. She was the one who spotted errors in my father's tax returns 3 years in a row. But the lawsuit didn't care about the truth. It was building a narrative. It claimed that the house in Druid Heights, according to long-held family understanding and agreement, had always been intended for Caden. That the home was supposed to be the seed capital for her bright future, a future that would bring prestige and honor to the Mercer name. Then came the cruelest blow. They weren't just suing to invalidate the will. They were also suing me, personally, for damages. I stared at the number on the page, reading it 3 times to make sure I hadn't misread it. $500,000. $500,000. The complaint declared that my fraudulent and malicious conduct had not only stolen family assets, but had directly sabotaged Caden's future, causing severe emotional distress and significant loss of business opportunity. They were suing me for stealing my sister's future. The papers slipped from my hands. $500,000. I had just poured nearly all of my savings from 17 years of work into the down payment on this condo. I was a pastry chef. Even as a head baker, I was still a baker. They knew I didn't have that kind of money. It was precisely because they knew that they chose that number. This wasn't just a lawsuit to reclaim a house. It was a threat wrapped in legal language, a financial noose designed to tighten until I had nothing left. It was a message written in the coldest possible terms. How dare you have anything that doesn't come from us? If you think the worst a family can do to you is silence and indifference, imagine holding a lawsuit in your hands, filed by your own parents, in which every line is crafted to make you the villain in their story. Stay with me. Because the next part will show you that before stepping into a courtroom, I had to face another jury, the memory of the only person who had ever stood on my side. I sat in the darkening apartment, lit only by the streetlights bleeding through the curtains. The lawsuit still lay on my lap, but my mind had drifted back 5 years. Johns Hopkins Hospital, late at night. The hospital room was saturated with the smell of antiseptic and lilies. The heart monitor beeped steadily, the only sound cutting through the thick silence. The sickly green glow of the medical screens cast warped shadows on the walls. Grandma Ruthie lay in the bed, so small my heart clenched, her skin thin as paper stretched over jutting bones. But her eyes, those eyes were still the same, sharp, alert, full of fire. I held her hand. It was all bone and tendon now, so fragile I was afraid to squeeze too hard. "Grandma," I whispered, "you should sleep. The doctor said you need rest." Her eyes opened, not hazy, just angry, not at me, but at the situation. "Rest later," she rasped, the steel in her voice intact. "We need to talk now. Where is she? Where's your mother?" I lowered my gaze. Mom had to take Caden to a dress fitting for the debutante ball. That's very important to her." Grandma Ruthie stared at me. A dry sound slipped from her throat. If it wasn't a cough, it might have been a bitter laugh. I hurried to lift the cup of water to her lips. "A dress fitting," she murmured when the coughing eased. "I'm lying here one step from the grave, and your mother is at a dress fitting." She closed her eyes for a long moment. "They never change, do they?" she said softly. "They've never seen what's right in front of them." Her frail hand suddenly tightened around mine, so forcefully it startled me. "That's why," she said, each word clear. "That is why it has to be you, Tiana. No one else. It has to be you." "What do you mean?" "The house," she cut in, her voice sharpening. "The house in Druid Heights. I'm leaving it to you. Only you." She reached for the bedside drawer and opened it. Inside was a thick stack of neatly arranged papers, her final will and codicil. "This house," she said, pushing the papers into my hands, "belongs to you, Tiana, entirely to you." I stared at the documents, my mind spinning. "But what about Dad? And Caden?" "No," she shook her head firmly. You are the one who sees real value. You are the one who respects hard work, the struggles. You are the only one who ever truly saw me." She pulled me closer. "But you have to promise me one thing. This is the hard part. This is my last wish." I nodded, my throat tight. "You let them live there," she instructed. "You let Harold and Lorraine stay in that house. You say nothing about this will. You hide it. You let them believe everything is the same. You let Caden and that vulture husband of hers think they are in control." "But why?" Her old but fiercely bright eyes locked onto mine. "Because one day they will reveal their true greed," she said quietly. "They will cross a line. They will reach for something that does not belong to them. Let them have enough rope, Tiana, to hang themselves." She paused, her voice growing urgent. "Only then, and only then, do you use what you have in your hands, and at that point you will know what to do." I gripped the will, the papers suddenly heavy as lead. That night, I agreed to carry the biggest secret of my life. I agreed to stay silent. I agreed to watch. I agreed to wait. "I promise, Grandma," I whispered. She smiled, a small, thin smile, but satisfied. And for the first time that night, she closed her eyes and allowed her body to rest. Shanice Rowe's office sat on the 12th floor of a glass building overlooking I-83, with a sweeping view of Baltimore stretching out below. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting bars of light across dark wooden bookshelves stacked with thick case files and old imposing law books. Shanice, a black woman around 35, with neatly styled natural curls and a fitted navy suit, sat behind her desk. She flipped through the first pages of the complaint, her sharp eyes moving slowly, her expression so unreadable I had no idea what she was thinking. I sat across from her, my hands clenched so tightly together that my knuckles had turned white. "Undue influence," Shanice read aloud, her voice calm, but not emotionless. "A familiar legal term, but what they're really trying to construct here," she tapped the edge of her pen against the stack of papers, "is a full-fledged character assassination." She raised her head and looked at me over thin frames. "Their entire case rests on two pillars. One, they try to prove your grandmother Ruthie lacked mental capacity. Two, they paint you as a financial failure, broke, bitter, jealous of your sister, and use that as their motive for claiming you manipulated an elderly woman." I shook my head, a wave of helplessness rising, choking me. Shanice set the pen down and leaned forward, her gaze sharpening. "I know that's not the truth, but they don't know, and they certainly don't care. They're constructing a picture, and our job is to rip that picture apart, piece by piece." She paused briefly, then asked bluntly, "So why have you never asked them for financial support? Your father is a professor. They live in a legacy home. For many families, that's normal. Why didn't you ask for help when you needed it, when it came to tuition, for example?" I lowered my eyes to the hands in my lap, because it wouldn't have meant anything. They made it very clear a long time ago where I stood in this family. "Not enough," Shanice said. Not harsh, but firm. "I need a specific moment. A moment when you realized you would never get anything from them. When did you learn that asking for help was pointless?" And the memories came, crashing in, unstoppable. 15 years earlier, my father Harold's office. I was 15, standing in the doorway with a notice from school about a cooking competition for high school students. First prize was a $5,000 scholarship to any culinary program. Entry fee, $45. I had been practicing for weeks, perfecting Grandma Ruthie's bread pudding recipe with my own twist, licorice and cinnamon. My home economics teacher said I had a real shot at winning. I had saved $20 from my job at Mr. Gus's diner. I was only $25 short. I knocked softly. "Dad?" He looked up from a stack of student essays, his tone impatient. "What is it, Tiana?" I have a chance to enter a cooking competition. First prize is a $5,000 scholarship. I might win. I just need $25 for the entry fee." A long silence stretched out. Then he turned back to the essays, picked up his red pen, and said a single word. "No." I froze. "But Dad, this is a scholarship." "Tiana," his voice went cold. "Caden was just selected for the state debate team. We had to spend $300 on her uniform, books, competition fees. That's what we call an investment. And you want $31,000 for a career in baking?" For the first time in that conversation, he looked directly at me. "Do you not understand? Caden has a future. She'll go to law school. And you play with dough." He turned back to his papers. "I told you, if you want to pursue your hobby, you pay for it yourself. I'm not wasting family resources on something with no future." I stood there a moment longer, the application form trembling in my hand. Then I walked away. I didn't enter that competition. And 3 months later, the winner was a girl whose parents paid all her fees. Her dish? Basic bread pudding with raisins. I knew mine was better, but I never got to prove it. If you've stayed with me this far, you've probably already seen what Shanice saw the moment she opened the file. My family didn't just refuse to help. They built a system in which I was always the outsider. And to protect myself in court, I would have to rip open every memory I buried throughout my youth, even the ones I had never dared to say out loud. "From that moment," I said slowly, "I knew I had to handle everything myself. If I wanted anything at all, I had to earn it on my own." Shanice wrote quickly, "Good. That's context. Now, tell me about culinary school. In their complaint, they claim you never asked them for help with tuition." A bitter smile flickered across my lips. "I did ask. Once. And it was the last time." I was 18, standing in the living room, holding my acceptance letter from the Baltimore Culinary Institute. "Culinary school?" My father laughed. "You're still obsessed with this baking thing?" "This is a career, Dad. Caden is going to study law," my mother cut in, her tone absolute. "That is a career." "I've saved $8,000. Tuition is $60,000. I just need you to co-sign the loan." "No!" He shot to his feet, tall, authoritative, overwhelming. "We will not co-sign so you can study baking. If you want to waste your life, you pay the price." Shanice stopped writing and looked up. "So what did you do?" "I borrowed the money myself," I said. "No co-signer, high interest, but I paid it. 3 years, 3 jobs, 4 hours of sleep a night. No breaks, no social life, no help from anyone." I swallowed. But I graduated, and 28 months ago, I paid off every last cent of those $60,000 plus interest. Shanice's eyes grew sharper. They've cast you as some broke, failed woman. They have no idea who you really are, do they? I shook my head. They've never asked. Shanice smiled. It was a smile like freshly honed steel. Then let me be clear. We're going to show them. Shanice flipped to another page. Their lawsuit says the house has always belonged to them, but the tax records say otherwise. She looked at me. You've paid the property taxes for 5 years, $8,200 each year, a total of $41,000. I nodded lightly. You also paid $20,000 to fix the roof after last year's storm. I nodded again, this time with more difficulty. Why? With the way they treat you, why would you still pay for them? The phone had rung at 11 at night. I had just finished a 14-hour shift. Sweetheart? Grandma Ruthie's voice trembling. Are you okay, Grandma? The property tax bill. Harold and Lorraine say they don't have the money. They say it'll be late. My heart clenched. Don't worry. I'll take care of it. Tiana, you don't have to. You took care of me my whole life. Now it's my turn. The next day, I paid $8,200 into Baltimore's tax system. I told no one. Then there was the autumn storm. An oak branch tore through the roof. Damage, $45,000. Insurance covered $25,000. The remaining $20,000. Grandma called, her voice anxious. Tiana, they're fighting. I'm afraid the house will be neglected. Let me handle it, Grandma. The next day, I wired the money for the roof repairs. No one ever knew. Back in the office, Shanice looked at me as if she were seeing a painting illuminated under a completely different light. Why did you do it? After everything? I took a deep breath, my chest heavy as stone. Because that house is your grandmother Ruthie's heart. And because... My voice caught. Deep down, I still hoped that one day they'd see me. Actually see me. Shanice reached out and rested her hand lightly on mine, a rare, gentle gesture. Tiana, she said, each word firm and clear, they didn't just teach you independence, they forced it on you, and that truth is what will save you in court. Then Shanice closed the file, her eyes gleaming like a blade freshly sharpened. From today on, we're going to make them see what they have never been willing to look at. 3 days after my meeting with Shanice, I got a phone call. A deep, warm male voice, smooth as an expensive glass of whiskey, came through the line. Ms. Tiana Mercer? This is Daniel Westbrook, counsel for Harold and Lorraine Mercer. My grip tightened around the phone. I'm listening? Your parents are very distressed by this situation, he said, his tone perfectly calm. This is a family matter. It should not be dragged through a courtroom. They have asked me to invite you to the office for an informal settlement conference, a chance for everyone to sit down, talk, and find a solution before worse things are said in public. Settlement. A family meeting. Even though I was being sued, even though the accusations in that complaint felt like knives in my chest, some foolish part of me still lit up with hope. Maybe my father had reconsidered. Maybe he had seen the lawsuit, realized how serious it really was, and wanted to talk. Maybe this time he would actually listen to me. I called Shanice immediately. She was skeptical on the spot. It's a trap, Tiana. They'll try to corner you into a settlement. Do not go in there without me. No. I shook my head, forcing my voice to stay even. He said it's a family matter. If I show up with a lawyer, it'll instantly turn into war. If I go alone, maybe there's still a chance for a real conversation. I have to try once. Shanice sighed on the other end. I could practically see her pinching the bridge of her nose. Fine, but remember this. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. The moment something feels off, you stand up, walk out, and call me. Immediately. I nodded. even though she couldn't see me. I promise. I drove out to Roland Park, the wealthy part of Baltimore where massive houses sat hidden behind old oak trees, high iron gates, and lawns trimmed to a level of perfection that felt hostile. Westbrook's office building was a cold block of steel and glass, the kind of architecture designed to make anyone walking in feel small and out of place. I was still in my kitchen whites, chef's jacket, checked pants. I had just finished a long shift at the restaurant and hadn't had time to change. In the elevator, my reflection in the stainless steel made me feel like an intruder, a baker who had wandered into the world of powerful people by mistake. The receptionist, a woman with a polite smile as cold as ice, led me down a long corridor, the carpet so plush my footsteps barely made a sound. "They're waiting for you in conference room A." They, my father and mother. I took a deep breath. I had rehearsed everything I wanted to say, not to beg, but to lay out for the first time in my life my side of the story. I pushed open the heavy oak door. The conference room was huge, dominated by a long mahogany table that could seat 30 people, leather chairs, warm golden lights, every detail designed to remind you that here, money and power were the only languages that mattered. And at the far end of the table, sitting side by side like a king and queen on their thrones, Caden and Tyrese. No father, no mother, just them, alone. The corner of Caden's mouth curled into a slow, gentle, poisonous smile. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," she sang. "You actually dragged yourself here after all." Tyrese leaned back in his chair, fingers laced together over his chest, lips pulling into a smirk. "Tiana, thanks for coming," he said smoothly. "We were starting to think you were exactly as stupid as you look. Not a settlement, not a family meeting. This was a carefully staged ambush. If you've ever walked into a room believing you were about to be heard, only to realize you were just the prey laid out on a table, you know exactly how I felt. I didn't yet know everything Caden and Tyrese had up their sleeves, but I knew one thing for sure. This was no longer about understanding each other. This was war. I stayed at the threshold, suddenly aware of how wrinkled and out of place my chef's jacket looked, in a room that smelled like leather and polished wood. Clearly, my parents were not here. Clearly, this was a trap. "Where are Dad and Mom?" I asked, keeping my voice steady but cold. "Your attorney said this was a family settlement meeting." Caden laughed, a sharp, high sound. "We are family, Tiana. At least the part of the family that matters. The part with a future." Tyrese leaned forward, switching into his reasonable business partner voice. "Look, Tiana, we're practical people, but we're also very generous," he said. "We know you're struggling. That little bakery of yours isn't exactly making a fortune, and now you've got legal fees on top of that. It's not a good look for the family brand." He slid a stack of papers across the table toward me. "So we've prepared something, a deal, very simple, and very generous." I didn't move. "How generous exactly?" "Very," he emphasized. "You sign this, just a short document. You voluntarily renounce any and all interest in the Druid Heights house. You acknowledge that Grandma Ruthie was mistaken when she executed the will. You confirm that the property rightfully belongs to the legal owners, Harold and Lorraine." He paused, watching me, eyes gleaming like he thought he had me pinned to the wall. "And in exchange?" "In exchange?" I repeated, my voice dropping. "In exchange," Tyrese continued, "we'll convince your parents to withdraw the lawsuit. No more fraud accusations, no more claim for $500,000 in damages, no ugly record. All you have to do is step aside, disappear from the picture, clean and simple." Caden jumped in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "And even that's not all," she said, turning to Tyrese. "You haven't told her the best part." Tyrese exhaled, as if he were about to grant me some royal favor. "Right. If our Druid Renaissance project succeeds, and believe me, it will, we're willing to give you 5% of net profits. just to help you stay afloat. A little—" Caden smiled, a smile as sharp as a knife. "Consider it charity, a small gift for all the trouble you've caused." 5%. Charity. For a property my grandmother had personally left to me. I looked at their smug faces. In my head, I heard Grandma Ruthie's voice again, that night in the hospital. "Let them have enough rope, Tiana. One day they'll hang themselves with it." I stepped forward, but I didn't sit. I just rested my hand on the back of the nearest chair. "No." Their smiles faltered. "What did you just say?" Caden narrowed her eyes. I said no. I pronounced each word clearly. "I'm not signing anything. I am not giving up my rights. And I am definitely not accepting charity from the two of you." I looked straight at Tyrese. "I'll see you in court." His face hardened. The smooth, charming mask slipped, revealing something much colder and meaner underneath. "You're going to regret this, Tiana," he hissed. "You have no idea who you're playing with." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," I replied. "I'm protecting my grandmother's legacy from people trying to turn it into a cash machine." He shot to his feet, his chair screeching across the floor. "You think owning that house makes you something?" he spat. "You're a baker. You're nobody." He leaned across the table, each word dropping like a threat. "We have evidence, Tiana. We have ways to prove you don't even deserve to own that house. We'll see you in court. And we'll destroy you." I turned away, hand on the conference room door. "Good," I said without looking back, "because I am very much looking forward to that." I walked out, closing the door behind me. The humiliation, the anger, the pain, all of it twisted into something else, something much clearer: resolve. From that moment on, this fight was no longer just about a house, it was about survival, and it had never been more personal. I stepped out of Westbrook's office building. The late afternoon Baltimore sunlight poured across the steps in a blinding strip, forcing me to squint. The breeze off the inner harbor was cool, but not nearly enough to soothe the tightness in my chest. My hands were still shaking when I pulled out my phone to call Shanice. She picked up after the second ring. "They tried to buy me off," I said bluntly, my voice still raw. "My parents weren't there, just Caden and Tyrese. They wanted me to sign away all rights to the house in exchange for 5% of the profits and a promise to drop the lawsuit." There was exactly one beat of silence on the other end. Then Shanice laughed, a cold, sharp sound like a blade being drawn across stone. "They just made their biggest mistake," she said slowly. "Do you know what that tells us? It shows us exactly how desperate they are. And the fact that they did this without your parents present tells me there is already a major fracture inside your family. We're going to use that." She paused, her voice shifting into something steady and serious. "Tiana, the deposition is next week. They're going to throw everything they have at you. They're going to paint you as a broke failure, a granddaughter who exploited her dying grandmother. They're going to attack every part of who you are." "I know," I whispered, knowing it didn't make it hurt any less. "But we have one weapon they can't touch." Her voice dropped, low and firm. "We have the truth, and the truth, Tiana, is going to destroy them." A week later, I sat in a freezing conference room for the deposition, facing my parents for the first time since that Sunday dinner. Attorney Westbrook opened the file in front of him, his smug smile spreading, as if the outcome were already in his pocket. He thought he understood the story. He thought he knew exactly who I was. But when I looked into my parents' eyes, the contempt, the absolute certainty in my supposed inferiority, I heard my grandmother's voice again, warm but unyielding. "Let them hang themselves, Tiana, and then you'll know what to do." The rope had been thrown out, and now they were the ones about to pull it tight. The moment I said my income was $185,000 a year, the room went silent. Westbrook froze. My parents glanced at each other, clearly shaken. This was not the failed little baker they had described in their complaint. Shanice struck instantly. "Now let's talk about the house," she said, placing a stack of documents on the table. Baltimore City property tax records for the past 5 years. She pointed to the line items. Each annual tax bill of $8,200 was paid out of Ms. Tiana Mercer's personal account, not Harold's, not Lorraine's. Everyone in the room turned to my parents. Shanice went on. And the $20,000 to repair the roof after the storm? Also from Tiana's account. My father stared at the documents, then at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something like shame in his eyes. In short, Shanice concluded, for 5 years, your daughter quietly paid the property taxes, paid for repairs, and kept the house standing, while you lived there without paying a cent. Then Shanice shifted to Druid Renaissance. Ms. Caden, this community revitalization project of yours, do you have any building permits, zoning approvals, a registered company for it? Caden stammered. Shanice cut her off. The city has no record of any such project under your name or your husband's. Then she turned to Tyrese. A suspended real estate license, $200,000 in gambling debt, another $40,000 lost just last week. Druid Renaissance isn't a vision. It is a plan to use the Druid Heights house as collateral to cover your losses. My mother exhaled sharply. My father lowered his head. Caden swung toward Tyrese, crumbling. You told me we already had investors. But the slick broker had nothing left to say. 2 months later, we were in court. The judge, a black woman of about my grandmother's generation, with a voice that filled the entire room, looked directly at my parents. You painted your daughter as a bitter, impoverished failure, she said. But the evidence shows that she is successful, independent, and that she has, in fact, been quietly supporting this family. She brought the gavel down. The complaint is dismissed with prejudice. Harold and Lorraine Mercer, along with Caden Mercer, will pay all legal fees and court costs incurred by Ms. Tiana Mercer. Then she turned to Tyrese. Matters involving the so-called Druid Renaissance project will be referred to the state's attorney for investigation into possible fraud. As we prepared to leave the courtroom, I asked for permission to say one thing. I turned back to face them. Throughout this case, everyone has been talking about the house like it's a prize, a pot of money, a cake to be divided, I said. But I don't want it. All 3 of them stared at me. I am going to sell the Druid Heights house, I continued, and 100% of the proceeds will go into the Ruthie Holloway Scholarship Fund. I briefly explained the fund would be administered by Baltimore Culinary Institute, providing full-ride scholarships for foster kids and young adults aging out of the system who wanted to pursue culinary arts, so no one else would ever have to stand there trembling in front of their parents, begging for $45 just to enter a competition, the way I once did. I looked at my father. He understood everything in that moment. I had turned their rejection of the girl who bakes into a legacy. And I had turned the shame of being unwanted into an open door for other children. Grandma used to say, legacy is not what you are handed, it is what you build, I said. They wanted me to be part of their legacy, but I chose to become my own. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my condo, watching the sun rise over the inner harbor, a hot cup of coffee in my hands. My phone buzzed with a new email. The Ruthie Holloway Scholarship Fund has selected its first recipient, Marcus Johnson, 19 years old, aged out of foster care in Philadelphia. He will begin classes next fall. Thank you for changing his life. Tears slid down my cheeks, but this time they were light. Free. I did not have the kind of family I once wished for, but I had myself, and I had other kids out there who would never again be told that training to become a baker was a waste of money. I am Tiana Mercer, executive pastry chef, founder of a scholarship fund, survivor. I am no longer the invisible daughter. I am the legacy. Tiana's story reminds us of something brutally clear. Your value does not live in the eyes of the people who refuse to see you. They can sneer at the work you choose. They can strip you out of their plans. They can turn you into the villain in their version of events. But none of that changes 3 simple questions. Who actually stands back up? Who keeps their dignity? Who builds something that outlasts money? When they try to steal your future, the sharpest form of revenge is not to play dirty back. It is to succeed so completely that the truth exposes their lies on its own. And remember, family is not only the people who share your blood. Real family is the people who choose to believe you, choose to stand with you, even when the ones who share your last name do not. If you have ever been the Tiana in your own house, underrated, overlooked, told you were not good enough, share your story in the comments. You never know who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, about betrayal, justice, healing, and the ways we rewrite our own destinies, do not forget, hit like so YouTube knows you need these stories. Subscribe and ring the bell so you do not miss the next episode. Because one day, it might be your story that becomes a legacy.